The document arrived at 0400 station time, delivered without ceremony, without escort, without even a courier's name attached to the transmission header. 847 pages. Arbiter Inquisitor Ossivar Telndrak of the Shaluvith Conclave stood in his review chamber and stared at the first page for 4 minutes before he read a single word. He had served in treaty arbitration for 31 years. He had reviewed weapons disclosures from 62 species. He had seen the inventories of civilizations that measured their armaments by the weight of moons, and civilizations that still sharpened stone. Not once, not in 3 decades of this work, had a species sent him 847 pages. The standard disclosure ran 40, 50 pages at most. Humans had sent 847. His junior analyst, Sub-Inquisitor Van Harith, stood beside him with her tablet at her side. She was young. She had never attended a Terran disclosure before. They are attempting to overwhelm the review process, she offered. Deliberate obfuscation. Classic delay tactic. Ossivar did not answer. He was still looking at the first page. The header read, Terran Consolidated Treaty Document, Rules of Engagement, Complete Operational Edition, Revision 14. Not a weapons list. A rules document. He had requested a weapons list. Standard Procedure, Article 7 of the Conclave's Treaty Framework. Every species under review submitted a list of their weapon systems, type, range, yield, deployment method. Clean. Simple. Auditable. Humanity had submitted 847 pages of rules. He set the document down on his review table. They sent the wrong file, Van Harith said. No. Ossivar picked it up again. They didn't. He turned to page 2. The second page was a table of contents. Chapters. Subsections. Appendices. He scanned down the list of appendices. There were 11, and at the bottom, listed last, was a designation he did not recognize, Appendix 7, Conditions of Suspension. He marked it. He would come back to it. He turned to Chapter 1 and began to read. By the time his office lights shifted from night mode to morning mode, he had read 40 pages. His second cup of processing fluid sat cold at his elbow. Van Harith had long since moved to the second review table, cross-checking the document's technical terminology against the Conclave's standard lexicon. She looked up twice but said nothing. Something was wrong with this document. He could not yet say what. He turned to page 41 and kept reading. The human representative arrived at the 9th hour. She was not what Ossivar had expected. He had dealt with human diplomats before, all careful words and formal posture, performing composure the way someone performs it when they've been trained rather than born to it. This woman entered the review chamber and sat down across from him as though the chair had been waiting for her specifically, as though she had sat in chairs in rooms very much like this one for most of her adult life and had stopped finding it interesting several years ago. She was Terran, Finnish, by the cultural designation on her credentials, somewhere in her middle years, with the kind of face that had been still for a long time. She carried one case. No aides. No security. Her name on the submission, Carolina Makinen, Senior Liaison, Terran Treaty Compliance Bureau. You have questions, she said. Not a question. Several. Ossivar set the document on the table between them. You submitted a rules document. Yes. I requested a weapons inventory. Yes. A pause. She waited for him to continue, completely without impatience. This, he said, touching the cover page, is not a weapons inventory. No, she agreed. It's better. He studied her face. There was nothing there to read. Not hostility, not amusement, just a kind of deep professional quiet, the same quiet he had seen in very old arbiters who had argued the same cases 10,000 times and had stopped needing the arguments to land. The Conclave's framework requires a weapons disclosure, he said. By type, range, yield, deployment method. Standard format. The Terran Treaty Bureau received your request, Carolina replied. We reviewed Article 7 of the Conclave framework. Article 7 requires disclosure of the full operational military capacity of the signatory species. We interpreted full operational capacity to include deployment doctrine, conditional protocols, and escalation frameworks. This document represents our interpretation of full operational disclosure. Your interpretation, Ossivar repeated. Yes. Ven Harith, at the second table, looked up briefly, then back to her screen. I have been reading this document for 6 hours, Ossivar said. I have reviewed weapons disclosures from 62 species. I know what they look like. What is in this document, what I have read so far, is not a weapons inventory in any format I recognize. That's because it isn't one. Then what is it? For the first time, something moved in her expression. Not a smile. Not quite. More like the memory of a smile, looked at from some distance. It's a list of what we agreed to stop ourselves from doing, she said. The weapons are in the appendices. He flipped to the back of the document. The appendices began at page 791. The weapons were ordinary. That was the first thing Ossivar noticed, and it struck him with an unsettling clarity that took him several minutes to name. He had reviewed the appendices covering Terran weapon systems, conventional, orbital, strategic, and the numbers were significant but not extraordinary. Humanity was a mid-tier military civilization by any standard metric. Their yield ranges were comparable to 4 or 5 other species the Conclave currently had under treaty review. Their delivery systems were well developed but not unique. There was nothing here that explained 847 pages. He set the appendices down and returned to the main document. To the rules themselves. He read Chapter 3 again. He had read it once already, quickly, looking for something he recognized. Now he read it slowly. Chapter 3, Conditional Authorization Framework, Offensive Operations. The chapter did not restrict. It authorized. Condition by condition, scenario by scenario, it listed the circumstances under which the Terran military was permitted to act. He had initially assumed these were restrictions, the kinds of prohibitions most species included in their treaty disclosures to demonstrate restraint. But they were not prohibitions. They were permissions. Signed, codified, democratically ratified permissions, organized by escalation tier. Tier 1, authorized response to direct attack on civilian infrastructure. Tier 2, authorized response to attack on colony systems within Terran jurisdiction. Tier 3, authorized response to attack on Earth itself. He read Tier 3 twice. Then he turned back to Carolina Mackinnon. These are not restrictions, he said. No. They are authorizations. Yes. Your military requires formal authorization, codified in an official document, before it is permitted to respond. Required to follow the document, yes. He studied her face again. The same stillness. The same distance. How many of your personnel have read this document? The current edition? A slight pause. Every active service member receives it at commission. Every reservist reviews it annually. The civilian document is publicly available on the Terran legislative record. Anyone can read it. Anyone. Anyone. Ossivar looked down at the table. Something had shifted in the room, though he could not yet say what had shifted or why he felt it. The document looked the same. The woman across from him looked the same. But something had changed in the last 3 minutes of conversation. He turned to page 2 again. The table of contents. His gaze stopped at the last line. Appendix 7, Conditions of Suspension. What is Appendix 7? He asked. Carolina's expression did not change. Not exactly. But her hands, which had been resting loosely on the table, became very still. Appendix 7, she said, was not included in the official disclosure packet. It's listed in the table of contents. Yes. Why? Because the table of contents is complete. She looked at him steadily. The disclosure is not. Ossivar sent the formal demand at the 11th hour, marked urgent. It went to the Terran Treaty Bureau, copied to Carolina Mackinnon's direct credentials, with a conclave seal of formal request attached. He had invoked Article 7 supplementary clause, the one that required signatory species to provide clarification on any listed document component. Appendix 7 was listed. Appendix 7 was therefore subject to supplementary disclosure. He expected a response in 2 hours, standard diplomatic timeline. He received one in 9 minutes. The Terran Treaty Bureau acknowledges the Conclave's formal request for Appendix 7. The Bureau notes that Appendix 7 falls under Terran Security Classification Level 1, the highest civilian classification available. Disclosure of classified treaty materials requires authorization from the Terran Treaty Compliance Bureau Directorate. We are seeking that authorization now. Please stand by. Ven Harith looked up from her station. They're going to deny it. No, Ossivar said quietly. He was watching the communication channel. They're not. He did not know why he was certain. Something about the way the message was worded, seeking authorization now, present tense, active, not will seek, not may seek. As though authorization was already in motion. As though the Bureau had anticipated the request. The response came 40 minutes later. Authorization granted. Appendix 7 attached. A single page loaded into his document queue. He opened it. He read the first paragraph. He stopped. He read it again. Appendix 7 was not a weapons list. It was not a deployment protocol. It contained 11 lines of text, organized under a single header, conditions under which all rules of engagement are suspended. There were 3 conditions. The first condition, if fewer than 10 Terran colony systems survive. He checked the current number of Terran colony systems. 312. The second condition, if fewer than 100 Terran military vessels remain operational. He checked the current number of Terran military vessels. 47,000. The third condition, if fewer than 100,000 humans survive. He checked. Earth's population alone was 12 billion. The outer colonies added 9 billion more. 21 billion humans, spread across 312 systems. The third condition would never be met. He looked up from the document. Carolina was watching him with the same still expression she had worn for the last 2 hours. These conditions, he said, and stopped. He started again. These conditions are impossible to meet. Under current population and fleet numbers, none of these thresholds. No, she said. They're not impossible. Humanity has 21 billion. Now. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Ossivar looked at the document. At the 3 conditions. He looked at the revision number on the cover page. Revision 14. 14 revisions. The document had been revised 14 times. When was this document first written? He asked. Something crossed her face. Not pain. Older than pain. The first edition, she said, was written when there were 89,000 of us left. The room was very quiet. The third condition, she said, is not a hypothetical. It's a historical threshold. Someone checked that box once before. She paused. When they wrote the rules, when the survivors sat down and put words on paper, they already knew what it felt like to be 89,000 people in a galaxy that wanted them gone. They wrote the rules anyway. They codified everything they agreed not to do, even then. Another pause, shorter. Appendix 7 is what they agreed they could do if it ever happened again. He looked at the 11 lines of text on the single page. What is in those 11 lines? He asked. What exactly are you permitted? I'm not permitted to discuss Appendix 7 beyond its contents. She looked at him without flinching. You have its contents. He looked at the single page. The 11 lines contained no specific weapons. No yield descriptions. No targets. Just 3 conditions in 11 lines of authorization so broad, so deliberately unspecific, that his legal training, 31 years of it, could not find their boundary. He had demanded to see their rules. He was beginning to understand that was a mistake. He asked her to wait while he processed. She waited. He stepped outside the review chamber into the corridor, closed the door, and stood in the quiet for a moment. He pressed his hand against the wall. The station hummed faintly. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. A sound, small, ordinary, drifted toward him. He followed it without thinking. Around the corner, near the waiting area at the corridor's end, a child was sitting on the floor beside a support pillar. She was perhaps 6 years old, human, clearly, wearing the gray and white of the station's dependent family quarters. She had a set of drawing tools spread around her and was applying a deep blue pigment to the wall beside her, carefully, as though the wall had requested it specifically. Ossivar stopped. The child looked up at him without alarm. She had the calm of children who have spent their lives on stations, who find alien faces unremarkable because the alternative is to find them remarkable all day every day, and that is simply too much work. What are you drawing? Ossivar asked. The child looked at the wall, then back at him. The ones that protect us. He looked at the wall. She was drawing stars. Small, precise, irregularly spaced. Not the casual stars of a child's imagination, the spiky, symmetrical kind. These were dots. Points of light. Carefully placed. He counted them. He stopped counting at 43, then counted again. 47 stars. He looked at her. She had gone back to her work, touching a pigment stick to the wall with the complete seriousness of someone who understands that precision matters. How do you know what they look like? He asked. She pointed up at the ceiling without looking at him. My mom showed me the sensor map. He stood there for a moment longer than he meant to. He went back to the review chamber. Carolina looked up when he entered. She waited. Who wrote this document? He asked. Not the Bureau. Not the Treaty Department. Who wrote this, the original? The first edition. A long pause. The longest she had given him. The survivors, she said. Of what? She looked at the window, at the deep nothing beyond the station's viewport, the scattered, indifferent stars. We don't have a name for it, she said. In the historical record it's just called The Last Time. She looked back at him. 89,000 people. Spread across 4 ships and 1 damaged station. They held a vote. Every single person voted. Then they sat down and wrote the rules. She was quiet for a moment. Every rule they agreed to follow. Every action they agreed to restrain. Every line they drew. Another pause. And then, when they were done, they wrote Appendix 7. Why write rules at all? He asked. If there were so few of you, if you were all ready. So we would remember we had a choice, she said simply. He looked at her face. At the stillness in it, the deep professional quiet. He understood now that it was not the quiet of someone who didn't feel this. It was the quiet of someone who felt it the same way every time and had stopped being surprised by it. You have delivered this document before, he said. Yes. How many times? She considered. 8. And every time, the other species, the other arbiters, how did they respond? She looked at him with something that was not quite compassion and not quite pity and was actually something more difficult than either. About the same as you, she said. The Conclave's ultimatum arrived at the 14th hour. Ossivar was not involved in drafting it. The order came from higher up the authority chain. The senior arbiter's office, 3 stations away, had received his preliminary report and had decided that the document represented an act of deliberate intimidation and that the appropriate response was to demand retraction, reclassification of Appendix 7 as non-binding, and full weapons disclosure in standard format within 12 hours or the Conclave would consider the treaty negotiation formally collapsed. He read the ultimatum twice. He thought about saying something. He did not. The ultimatum transmitted at the 15th hour. He watched it go. Carolina was still in the review chamber. She had made herself a cup of something. The station's beverage dispenser had responded to her request without any visible adjustment on her part, which suggested she had been here long enough to know the machine's interface, and was sitting with it in both hands, looking at nothing in particular. Her communication device activated. She looked at it. Read the message. Set the device down. She picked up a different device, smaller, personal, the kind that operated on encrypted Terran channels separate from the station's network. She made one call. He heard her say, Ossivar Telndrak has been given official notification. Nothing else. She set the device down and looked at the window. At the 15th hour and 40 minutes, the Conclave fleet received orders to move to firing position. 12 vessels, flagship class, arrayed in a pattern that would cover all exit vectors from the station. Standard Conclave procedure for treaty enforcement. Ossivar had seen it once before, against a species that had attempted to destroy evidence during a disclosure review. The fleet moved. Humanity did not respond. No defensive scramble. No shields. No counter-deployment from the human vessels docked at the station's berths. No communication on any channel from the Terran military. The Conclave fleet reached firing position and the galaxy continued to exist exactly as it had before. Ossivar watched the sensor display. Then the sensor display showed something it had not shown 4 minutes ago. 47 objects. No engine signatures. No power readings. No life signs on any scan. No electromagnetic emissions of any recognized type. Just mass, enormous, deliberate mass, on the passive sensor array, drifting into scan range from the deep black beyond the system's outer edge. They had not emerged from faster-than-light transit. They had not powered on. They had been there. They had simply been there, in the dark, outside sensor range, for however long they had been there, and they were now drifting close enough to be visible. His scanner identified them as Class unknown. Designation unknown. Age, indeterminate. Origin, Terran. He looked at the size readings. He checked them twice. Each object was larger than the moon his homeworld orbited. Each one read as entirely inert, no power, no life, no warmth. 47 cold, dark objects the size of small moons, drifting information on no propulsive system he could detect. His communication channel opened. Carolina's voice, still calm, still quiet. Those are our treaty enforcement vessels, she said. They've been in this system since before your civilization had writing. He stared at the sensor display. They won't fire, she said, unless I ask them to. A pause. Long and clear and very quiet. Do you want me to ask? He looked at the display. At the 12 Conclave warships in firing position. At the 47 objects that the sensors could not classify and could not estimate and could not describe with any category he had ever encountered in 31 years of this work. He opened a channel to the senior arbiter's office. Withdraw the ultimatum, he said. A silence on the other end. "Withdraw it," he said again. The withdrawal agreement was signed at the 17th hour. Standard format. Neutral language. Both parties acknowledging the continuation of treaty review under revised consultation protocols. His signature, the senior arbiter's seal, Carolina's name written in the clean, unhurried hand of someone who had signed many documents. She did not shake his hand after. It was not required and she did not offer it. She gathered her case, the single case, the same one she had arrived with, and walked toward the corridor without any expression of satisfaction or relief. Ossivar watched her go. He should have let her leave. He spoke anyway. "You've done this 8 times, he said. She stopped. Turned slightly. The document. The disclosure. The waiting. He found he did not entirely know what he was asking. "Does it become easier?" She looked at him for a moment. Her face was the same face it had been for 9 hours. Still, professional, deep with something he did not have a word for in any language he knew. "It becomes more certain," she said. She left. He stood in the corridor for a while. The station resumed its normal rhythms around him, foot traffic, the distant hum of environmental systems, a group of maintenance staff moving equipment toward the lower bay. Ordinary. The kind of ordinary that happens because nothing is currently on fire. He walked back toward his quarters along the long corridor near the family wing. The child was gone. The drawing tools were gone. But the stars were still there on the wall, 47 small, precise points of deep blue, evenly spaced, carefully placed by a 6-year-old who had learned their location from her mother's sensor map. Who had thought it was worth drawing. Who had not found it unusual to draw them, because they had always been there, in the dark, and that was simply a thing she had grown up knowing. He stood in front of the drawing for a long time. He thought about 89,000 people on 4 ships and a damaged station. He thought about a vote, every person voting. He thought about them sitting down afterward, with everything they had just survived still on their hands, and writing a document. Rules. Pages and pages of rules. Every line carefully drawn. And at the end, before they signed it, they wrote Appendix 7. Not because they needed it then. Not because they expected to need it. So they would remember they had a choice. He filed his preliminary report the next morning. At the bottom, in the section marked Assessor's Personal Notation, not for general distribution, he wrote one line. "We demanded to see their rules. We should have asked why they needed rules at all." He marked the report. He sealed it at the highest classification available to him. He sent it, and sat for a moment in the quiet of his office, and looked at the viewport, and the stars beyond it, and tried to remember if any of them had always been there. He could not be certain that they had not.